I get asked all the time, what is the difference between insomnia and sleep apnea, and can I have both? So, in this video, I am going to clearly define both disorders, talk about how they're similar, talk about how they're different, and talk about what it looks like when somebody has both at the same time. Because, spoiler alert, yes, you can have both. So let's start out by talking about insomnia. What is insomnia? So the word insomnia means not sleep. In Latin, in means not, and somnus means sleep. The clinical disorder of insomnia is difficulty falling asleep or staying asleep. It could be either, could be both. We tend to use longer than 30 minutes as the definition of difficulty. So the rest of the symptoms are distress about the sleep problem and or just a sense that you're not at your best during the day because of the sleep problem. Again, could be either, could be both. So essentially, insomnia is I am trying my damnedest to sleep and I just can't. So I try harder and it gets worse. That's insomnia. Insomnia is really a learned behavior that's become a habit in the brain. So, a common cause is over time, your brain has learned to associate your bed with wakefulness rather than sleep. And that wakefulness response eventually becomes automatic. Then, of course, the ways people try to fix the sleep problem, things like spending more time in bed, trying too hard to sleep, actually contribute to more wakefulness. So, check out, I'm going to link, I have an insomnia playlist for deeper dives into insomnia. I will link that above. So now let's talk about what is sleep apnea. So apnea, the word apnea means no breathing. This comes to us from the Greek. So pnea or P, that P-N-E-A, that means breath. You put an A in front of it, that negates the word. So sleep apnea means your breathing repeatedly stops or becomes severely reduced during sleep. There are two types of sleep apnea, obstructive and central. With obstructive sleep apnea, you are trying to breathe, but your airway is blocked. And with central sleep apnea, your brain temporarily stops sending the signal to breathe. Central sleep apnea is usually secondary to other things like heart conditions, stroke, opioid use, stuff like that. So most sleep apnea is obstructive. So that is what I'm going to focus on here. So with obstructive sleep apnea, assuming no insomnia, the ability to sleep is usually there were it not for the breathing problem. So here's what typically happens. You fall asleep, everything relaxes, including your airway. Some people just naturally have a narrower or more collapsible airway than others to begin with. So as the airway narrows, breathing becomes more difficult. Your brain senses something is wrong, so it wakes you up briefly so you could breathe again and not die. You start breathing normally, everything's great, you fall back asleep, and then the whole thing repeats over and over and over and over throughout the night. So, depending on the severity of the problem, this could be happening hundreds of times over the course of the night. So, I want to talk briefly about what sleep apnea and insomnia have in common. So, certainly both disorders are going to disrupt your sleep, albeit in somewhat different ways. Both can cause frequent awakenings overnight, although those awakenings are going to look a little different in each disorder, which I'll go over when I get to the section about how are they different. Both are often going to leave you feeling like your sleep was not restorative, and both are going to have an impact on your mood, your concentration, your energy, and just your overall quality of life. So before I get into talking about how they're different, I do want to flesh out this question of can you have both? Because that answer is a resounding yes. So in fact, it's common enough that it has its own name. It's called COMISA, COMISA, which is an acronym for comorbid insomnia and sleep apnea. So in medicine, morbid means like sickness or illness, and comorbid is when two sicknesses or illnesses are present in the same person. So the important thing to know here is that if you have COMISA, you have two different disorders that require two different treatments. Insomnia is best treated with cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or CBTI. I have a video where I recorded myself doing essentially session 1 of CBTI. If you're curious what that looks like, I will link that above. Sleep apnea is most commonly treated with something called a CPAP. CPAP stands for continuous positive airway pressure. So this is a device that uses pressure to keep your airway open. Now, COMISA is really a situation where 1 plus 1 is more than 2 because each condition is going to make the other one harder to get a handle on. So if you have both, you might spend an hour trying to fall asleep or lie awake for long stretches during the night. There's the insomnia. And then whatever sleep you do get is interrupted because you stop breathing. There's the apnea. Also, another challenge, like I said earlier, CPAP is the gold standard treatment for sleep apnea. But if you also have insomnia and someone's like, here, put this weird thing on your face and try to sleep, like that ain't happening. So I personally think you have to treat the insomnia before somebody could even think about using that CPAP. Okay, so now let's talk about how they're different. So I want to preface this by saying I am speaking in generalities. There are certainly always going to be exceptions to all of these, but broadly speaking, these have been my observations. So the first is in the area of daytime symptoms. So people with sleep apnea are often sleepy. People with insomnia are often tired. Those aren't the same thing. Sleepiness means you're likely to fall asleep. Tired is more like fatigued, but not likely to fall asleep. You can be tired without being sleepy. People with sleep apnea often nod off because they are just simply not stringing together any reasonable stretch of time of solid sleep throughout the night. People with insomnia are often described as tired but wired, and it's the wired that's really interfering with their sleep. So, on average, people with sleep apnea are much more likely to fall asleep intentionally during the day than somebody with insomnia. So, somebody with insomnia will often lie down, try to take a nap, and not fall asleep. The second difference is in what the night looks like. So, people with sleep apnea often fall asleep pretty quickly, but have a lot of brief awakenings throughout the night. It's like these little short up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. They return to sleep pretty quickly. They may or may not even remember the awakenings. People with insomnia, on the other hand, they're spending long blocks of time awake, either at the beginning of the night or in the middle of the night, or maybe both. Another difference is in anxiety around sleep. So, this is just my clinical observation. I don't know if there's any data here, but I have observed people with insomnia are much more anxious about their sleep on average than people with sleep apnea. So in insomnia, people often become obsessed with their sleep. They think about it all the time. They worry about it constantly. I haven't seen as much of that in sleep apnea. Again, just my observation. Your mileage may vary there. And then health risks. So sleep apnea is generally considered the more medically dangerous disorder. Now, most people with insomnia are pretty concerned about the long term effects of poor sleep. And it certainly doesn't help that we have all these news stories and articles that say you will get dementia and die if you don't get enough sleep. One thing that is worth remembering is that a lot of the time research is lumping in people with insomnia and people who intentionally restrict their sleep, which, if you have insomnia, that is not you. That is I don't know, I'll call them like hustle bro, I'll sleep when I'm dead, brag about only needing 2 hours of sleep kind of people. That's not somebody with insomnia. That's something different. Now, those hustle bro people, that's who needs to be reading those articles. They're not reading the articles because they are not concerned about it. They don't have a problem. It's the people with insomnia who are getting a hold of those articles and those news stories and then panicking that they're going to get dementia and die. So, by the way, also, fun fact, panic about sleep, panic about the effects of not getting sleep, that's going to lead to effort, and sleep does not reward effort. Sleep apnea just puts a lot more direct stress on your heart. So, I'm not aware of any documented deaths attributed to insomnia. But in doing research for this video, I actually learned that sleep apnea has been implicated in the deaths of a lot of very well-known people, including Carrie Fisher, James Gandolfini, and Jerry Garcia. And then finally, there's differences in how these two things are diagnosed. So sleep apnea requires a sleep study for diagnosis. A sleep study can tell you, do you stop breathing? How often? How much respiratory or how much effort is there to breathe? All the pieces you need to diagnose sleep apnea. Insomnia is diagnosed with a clinical interview and a sleep diary. So, a sleep study usually isn't helpful for diagnosing insomnia, because it just can't measure the contributing factors to insomnia as well as it can measure the contributing factors for sleep apnea. So, in closing, if there is one thing I hope you take away from this video, it's this: insomnia and sleep apnea are two different disorders. You can absolutely have both. And if you do have both, treating just one may still leave you sleeping poorly because the other disorder is still there. So the good news is both conditions are treatable. The key is, again, being aware that you have two problems. So we need two solutions. If you found this video helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe. I make videos about all kinds of sleep issues. And if there's another sleep question you'd like me to cover, let me know in the comments. All right. Thanks for watching. Bye.